Well, good afternoon and welcome to this very special webinar where we're going to be looking at 3 strategies for reducing non-interest expense in 2022. I'm Al Dominic, the CEO of Bank Director. It's my real distinct pleasure to welcome everyone who's tuning in from across the United States today as we think about how and where to employ some of these strategies. This is a webinar brought to you by both Bank Director and Cornerstone Advisors. If you're not familiar with Bank Director, real quick, we're a resource to the financial community, sharing information since 1991. What we really aspire to do on a regular basis is to connect key decisions with key decision makers around key moments in time. And so we find ourselves dealing with issues that are strategic and really fundamental to a bank's CEO, senior leadership team, chairman, and independent outside directors. In conjunction with Cornerstone Advisors, we're putting this on together today because Cornerstone does just an exceptional job delivering consulting services, industry insight, and pulling together executive forums that help banks to improve profitability and performance both quickly and efficiently. So before we get started, I just want to give you a little bit of housekeeping. Again, we've been doing these for a while now. I'm sure these are not the first time you've seen slides with housekeeping notes about being in listen-only mode. But I say that to you because don't worry, we can't hear anything that's going on your side. Really, all you should be able to hear would be us. We do recommend that you click on the slide bar at the bottom of the screen to adjust the presentation material and also to be able to see the presenter. If you have any questions for our speaker, please don't hesitate to use that Q&A button found on the right side of your screen. You can do this during any time during the presentation. And once Brad wraps up his remarks, I'll have those available to me so I can put them in front of him. In terms of note taking, I know some of you are just awesome when it comes to taking notes, and you've got your pencil and pad of paper right there in front of you. But if you don't have one, don't worry. We're going to be sending this presentation to all attendees within 24 hours via email. You'll also see it available on bankdirector.com. Now, we do not expect any technical issues, but again, I'll knock on wood because those are famous last words. If you do have any challenges, just use the moderator chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen, and my commitment is we'll do our best to take care of it. Finally, I do need to tell you that the opinions expressed in this webinar are those of the individual speaker only and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of other speakers or of the entities with which the speakers are associated. So I'm going to wink and nod at our legal team for asking me to put that in. It's important, but really the most important thing for me to do right now is to tell you a little bit about your speaker today. So I'm going to pull up a slide about Brad Smith, who's a partner at Cornerstone Advisors in the core transformation practice. Brad is somebody that I've known for a while now. He has overseen projects that are technical roadmaps, core and digital vendor evaluations, doing strategic planning for banks, looking at process and figuring out how and where it can be improved, merger integration, de novo bank openings, you name it, and Brad's probably been involved with it. He's a really accomplished professional. He's a frequent speaker, and I would say he's really a longtime friend to community and regional banks. So Brad, I'm going to give you the microphone and let you do your thing. When I come back on, it's to ask you a few questions after you've taken us through the first slides today.
Great. Thank you so much, Al. Appreciate the opportunity, as always, to with your audience about current trends and issues. Banking non-interest expenses begin after maybe a couple years of focusing on other items. So appreciate the opportunity to visit today and look forward to taking some questions here in just a bit with you, Al, as well. Just a quick agenda. We'll move through this rather quickly, but I did want to just share a little perspective on why the renewed interest in expense management, non-interest expense management. Then we'll spend our time talking through the 3 strategies that we think are important for managing non-interest expense as we head into a new budget and planning cycle. Most of you will be tackling that here in the coming weeks and months. So I want to share our perspective on how do we manage expenses around technology, around branches and channels, and around employee performance. So a little sneak peek on the 3 strategies. But let me first start with just why are we talking about non-interest expense again? Most of us have been doing this long enough to know we kind of go in cycles. We focus on growth. We've been focusing on digital. We've been focused on margin, and now we're talking non-interest expense and efficiency ratio again. So why is that? Well, the bottom line is we're in what some folks at Cornerstone have termed a revenue recession. Our banks and our bank clients are working harder than ever, dealing with more daily stress than we've ever dealt with. Just as soon as we were all excited to start getting back into our offices and branches, now we're having to deal with Delta. Now we're having to deal with slowdown in mortgage originations and PPP applications that seem to have kind of come and gone. And we're working harder, yet we are generating less revenue. And the reason is one that I'm sure all of your CFOs have been talking about, the yield curve, right? In under 3 years, the 10-year bond yield has dropped nearly 200 basis points, even as the economy started to open back up in 2021. And this drop happened at the same time as banks were becoming flush with deposit liquidity from the COVID flight to safety, as well as all those government relief checks hitting all of our customers' accounts. And so for mid-size and community banks, the impact to revenue has been striking and certainly problematic. These banks, our clients, certainly feel like they were starting to make a lot of strides towards improving scale, able to stay in the game, able to compete against the big banks, the neo challengers, the fintechs, et cetera. But now their plans to invest in the future are colliding with these revenue realities and struggling with how do we manage all of this, because a 54 basis point in net interest margin over the last 3 years has hurt us maybe more than others, because we are so dependent on margin, because most of us are only generating about 20 to 25% of our revenue from fee income, and that continues to be under attack both from new digital payments providers, COVID pressures. It's very difficult to generate deposit service charges in this environment when we're just flushed with liquidity. So if margins are likely going to remain thin, if non-interest income is likely going to remain a challenge, that keeps pushing us back to non-interest expense. But wait, we also have to free up money to invest in digital, right? Because we are all, I think, under extreme pressure to really reimagine our business models around digital, around data and analytics, around automation technologies. And many mid-sized banks and community banks still have a ways to go in digital transformation. The right-hand side is survey response from the beginning of the year from community and regional financial institution clients. And those far right charts say that a little more than half, 52% of surveyed banks are just now launching their digital transformation strategies in 2021, or even have yet to launch their strategies. So we still got a lot of progress we need to make on digital. So here, bank CFOs, CEOs, bank execs starting to look at their 2022 budget. That's probably even more difficult than 2021 budgets. We're expecting, still probably flat revenue growth. At the same time, we've got this pressure to make significant investments in digital, and that shift requires shifts in resources and dollars. And realistically, there's just a shortage of both those right now. So, enter the new model. The new next-gen banking model is we've got to be managing non-interest expense at the same time as investing in the future. So the idea is, how do we reduce legacy costs in branch and legacy tech to free up some of those savings, then to pour back into digital tech, Marcom, data, et cetera, to be able to fuel growth, efficient growth, smart growth, and potential acquisition as we look for a more efficient model with lower margins, hopefully more fee income down the road, but smarter growth in the interim. So that's what we want to talk about today, is this idea of reducing legacy costs at the same time, doing it the smart way without crushing culture, without negatively impacting customers, and freeing up some of those savings to pour back into digital channels and other profitable growth engines. So let's start with the easy one first. The easy one is finding savings in the tech area, because oftentimes you can find tech saves, especially through vendor contract negotiations, in a way that frees up spend without impacting employees or customers. So I'll share a few thoughts on contract negotiation best practices, but let me just share a few benchmarks because I know you guys love these benchmarks. So why do we focus on tech spending? Well, because it's a big dollar number. It's a large amount of your non-interest expense. So just pulled some of the cornerstone spend metrics here. And a typical $5 billion bank is spending somewhere between $10 and $15 million a year on tech. You can use the tech spend as a percentage of asset numbers there on the left-hand side, just to benchmark yourself to see how you compare. I just use $5 billion based on our attendees here to give a rough idea. So $10 to $15 million in non-interest expense, a sizable number, but it's a wide-ranging number. And I've been doing this for 30 years, there still is no clear metric that says the more you spend on tech, the more efficient you are, the more profitable you are. There's not a one-to-one correlation because there's a whole lot that goes into it, which is another way of saying you've got some variation in there. And our experience between cost saves, economic rigor, vendor contract negotiations, a $5 billion bank can sometimes find up to $6 to $7 million in annual tech spend savings. And we'll talk about contract negotiations here in just a second. But I did want to also provide some line items because tech spend's a pretty broad category, obviously. We look at tech spend across a couple different line items here. We look at core spend, datacom spend, remote delivery, which of course now includes digital, infrastructure, and strategic. Strategic would be CRM, analytics, loan origination systems, sales systems, more strategic, discretionary type spend. And wanted to share, just some benchmarks there that you can use, but also want to share what the trend has been the last several years is core spend has become commoditized relative to assets. Core spend has come down, datacom has come down, infrastructure has come down. At the same time, remote delivery and strategic system spend has increased. So just broadly, one strategy I'd encourage you to look at is has your datacom and infrastructure spend relative to FTE, relative to assets, relative to non-interest expense come down, because as an industry that spend has, and the vendors have become commoditized, particularly for those that have already made the move to virtualization. So if you haven't done that, I encourage you and your CIOs to be evaluating that, not just for 2022, because you may have some upfront costs you have to spend, but over time you should be seeing really good economies of scale around datacom, infrastructure, and potentially core. So just a quick comment on core, because today we say there's really an important decision you need to make about core and how your core vendor and core processing system fits in with your strategy and business model. Because ultimately, I think you need to make the call of whether core needs to be commoditized for you. That is, we got to ratchet our core spend down to free up to spend in other areas. Or you may be at a point, maybe your core systems are end of life, maybe your processes are so manual and inefficient because of your core that you can't improve those without a core change. So it's either a core commoditization strategy or something more like a core transformation strategy for banks that do need to make a change and can justify spending more on new core in order to improve efficiency, to improve customer experience, to improve risk management. So core is maybe commoditization, maybe a transformation strategy. But look at your tech spend across a couple different buckets, and we would hope to see that your core spend relative to your size is improving, that you're actually starting to see some scale. Now, couple of other quick thoughts, just because this is such a hot area right now, and we see CIOs just caught in between, the mad dash for catch-up tech spend after a lot that was slowed down in 2020. Huge requests for digital spend and infrastructure spend, et cetera. So we think rationalization is really important, and it always is, but particularly is going into this budget cycle. There's just sort of a general feel of, hey, we got to be playing catch up. And if my CIO has 43 project or tech investment requests, I guess we're just going to have to do all of those. But that's not the case. You still need a simple ROI model to balance out, the smart tech investments versus the ones that maybe you can sit on for a while, maybe defer, maybe kill entirely. We still see, well up into the $10, $15 billion banks not have very much rigor around how they rationalize projects. And something that needs to be done, whether you're a $300 million community bank or a $15 or $50 billion bank, is how do we rationalize, how do we compare competing technology projects against each other based on some sort of ROI. On the infrastructure side, there's, in addition to virtualization, it's a good time to be looking at what do you have that's redundant. Are you paying for licenses you don't need, for lines you don't need, for servers that you don't need? Just look to eliminate redundancy. Maybe even have applications and modules that you're paying for. Particularly problematic in Fiserv shops where you're kind of nickel and dime kind of invoicing. You're probably still paying for stuff that nobody's using today. That's worth doing some invoice audits and just asking questions back to IT or lines of business to find immediate saves, in addition to the obvious negotiation saves. As you ramp up your staffing and a lot of money going into contract staffing resources, professional services, just because it's hard to find W-2s right now, manage those diligently. Be wary of just giving the open-ended check approvals to line of business and even IT, and look at right-sizing staffing. We see a lot of banks that have virtualized, moved to outsource for core virtualized infrastructure, but they haven't adjusted their staffing levels. They still have the same number of folks managing networks or infrastructure, even though they've handed a lot of that off to other vendors. So a lot of opportunity in tech spend, but probably the easiest one that I kind of teed up a second ago is around contract negotiation. So really the easiest way to save money in tech with virtually no customer impact, no employee impact, is to take back some portion of the dollars that you're sending to your vendors today. So I'll share just a few things. We've got tons of content on this at our website and in Gonzo Banker, our blog. But let me just share a couple of best practices, because we have to talk about this pretty often, because especially when people get busy, COVID worlds where some of our discipline has maybe been watered down, we see folks kind of crawfishing back to maybe bad habits. First and foremost, do not let contracts auto-renew. I know that's probably self-evident, but we get at least one call a week from someone that just realized they let a different contract auto-renew, and they try to figure out, how do I unwind? How do I go back in time? It is exceedingly difficult to do that. So you need a list, whether it's part of your vendor management program, whether it's part of contract management, whoever owns it, legal, IT, vendor management. You need a list or a system of all of your major vendor contracts and when those contracts terminate, what the notification period is, and you need to manage that. We call it a contract roadmap to make sure that you're well on top of those vendor contracts before they come up for renewal. Not only so you avoid them auto-renewing, because when that happens, you typically lose whatever discounts you had, or certainly lose the opportunity to negotiate any new discounts. But also, if you don't realize it until the day before, you've lost any ability to go out and get competitive bids. You don't even have time to ask, hey, are we even happy with this vendor bill? So you need to keep track of it. Somebody needs to own that. It needs to be presented in IT steering committee monthly, or some sort of executive level committee on a monthly basis. The other strategy that's very effective right now is to begin negotiations well before your contract actually comes up for renewal. The sweet spot for us, for most contracts, is kind of that 18 to 24 months before the contract renews. So if you're going to renew with an existing vendor, you can begin that renewal well before the contract termination date. You're essentially extending the term or getting a new, say, 5-year term at year 4 of a 5-year deal. Now, in COVID, many vendors, especially core vendors, are feeling the pain, and they are often willing to break existing contracts in year 3. Not always, but most of the time. So we would encourage you to begin your negotiation almost at the halfway point of contracts, especially on your big spend, digital payments, or those contracts often can be renewed well before termination. Take advantage of better pricing today. It is a buyer's market for most technology categories today. So you can get some really good deals out there. You don't need to wait 2 years to do that. Related to that, it again seems obvious, but always get competitive bids. Right now, you are likely getting unsolicited renewal bids from your existing vendors, which seems like a great idea. It is good for them to be stimulating those conversations, but that's typically an indication that you are overpaying that vendor. And before you say, yeah, Brad, but they gave us 10% out of the gate, the problem is you may be paying 40% more than market. So that 10% savings they're proposing may still be 30% over market. So the best way to find out what market pricing is to either, number 5, hire folks, outside people that keep track of pricing and negotiate these contracts all the time, and or to get competitive bids. Even if you know you're going to single source this, you know you're going to buy this from your core vendor or the vendor that you already have a relationship with, spend a little bit of time, get the second bid, maybe even a third, take a quick look at the products. Just doing that will typically bring your existing vendor back to reality on what market pricing is by letting them know that you're going out for bid. The fourth item I'll mention briefly is around term. Vendors today are really pushing long-term deals, 6, 7, even 10-year deals. That's typically a bad idea. 5 years, based on our experience and most of our data points, 5 years is sort of that sweet spot between long enough term to get good pricing discounts, short enough to give you some flexibility. Not always. There might be reasons to go out a little bit longer, but be very wary of 6, 7+ year terms. That makes exiting those agreements really, really expensive. The pricing for most technology comes down over time, so you don't want to be locked into long-term pricing as market pricing drops. Okay, so first item, tackle tech spend. Prioritize, bring rigor to your discipline on how you decide on what technology investments to make, how to make them, and then use really good contract negotiation practices to make sure that you're spending what's appropriate, not overspending, and finding cost saves, particularly on renewal deals, that you can then reinvest back in technology and other methods. All right, let's tackle number 2. Number 2 is around channels, and there's been a lot of discussion, obviously, during COVID around branch closures, branch rationalization. So, if nothing else, COVID certainly taught us that we can service many, maybe most of our customers outside of our branch network. Most of you have adjusted and been very effective at that. So you would think that would mean that banks and FIs have eliminated thousands of branches during COVID, right? Well, not exactly. On one hand, the industry closed about 2,600 branches here on the right last year, but at the same time opened 1,300 branches in 2020. So the net effect of that means that on the left-hand side, that sort of long and slow trend line towards branch consolidation, it hasn't changed all that much. It's still long and slow. So why have we not taken advantage of this COVID opportunity to reduce branches? Well, the 3 biggest reasons we see at Cornerstone in the community and mid-sized bank market, probably number 1 is just the fear, I would argue, irrational fear of reputation risk that, oh my gosh, our customers would freak out or would send a message to our market that we're in trouble, blah, blah, blah. And yes, we know we've got unprofitable branches, but we can't risk that brand risk or reputation risk in the market. The second would be a surprising number of banks just don't have very good branch profitability data. So they're not even exactly sure which branches are profitable. How do we measure that? And I want to talk about that here in just a second. And then the last one, I think COVID also reinforced that far too many community and mid-sized banks are entirely dependent on the branch network for sales. Or said another way, many banks are just not very good at selling outside of the branch. So the fear is if we close our branch, how are we going to sell? It may take us another 3 years before we're very good at selling through our digital channel. But the reality is branch networks are still too expensive for far too many banks, and branches can no longer be the primary or sole source of your sales activity. Branches are continuing to become more of an expense than an asset. The data is pretty clear. So you're likely going to have to invest more in digital and call center and other channels for sales at the same time, probably pare back costs and investments in branches. So let me just share a very simple concept that often gets lost in branch rationalization efforts. A lot of banks have some level of profitability reporting, but they have this waterline of either being profitable or not. And we would argue that even profitable branches may need to be closed in addition to the obvious unprofitable branches. And that's if you look at the return on channel. The return on channel is just a simple measurement of the direct revenue contribution and the indirect value of servicing for each channel relative to the direct expense of the channel. So the idea here is the reinforcement that your channels are about sales and service. So the value of your sales activity and revenue activity, as well as the value of service. So, but let's put this into perspective around branches. The average branch new account employee today, or pre-COVID, I should say, the average branch new account employee pre-COVID opened 28 new accounts per month, which is just 1.3 new accounts per day. So the average new account salesperson is selling one, sometimes two new accounts a day on average, which begs the question, what are they doing the rest of the day? Are they making outbound calls? Are they based in the branch but still making outbound calls and selling otherwise? The answer often is no. So they're really just, many of them, an expensive call center rep just sitting out in your branch servicing people in person. And perhaps we need to be thinking of it that way. My point is, yes, you need to be more aggressive in branch rationalization, but you probably need to also be looking at not just your unprofitable branches, but your profitable branches relative to your spend across other channels. So I'll share just an example of return on channel across multiple channels. This is for a $1 billion bank, may or may not apply to you, but my guess is some of the concepts is at least directionally accurate. So this return on channel calculation showed the branch channel return was just 0.42, meaning for every dollar they spent on branch, they generated just $1.42 in revenue and indirect servicing value. Compare that to digital at, again, this bank, which was underperforming peer, at this FI return on digital channel was almost 6. Peer was 12. So for every dollar you spend in digital, there's a six times better return, actually 12 times better than branch, because 6 times return on digital channel. Even call center or phone and call center, even ATM were significantly more effective return-wise than branch. So does this mean you need to close your branches and become a digital bank? Certainly not, maybe some. But this just means you need to look at your channel mix and figure out where the best investment on dollars are. Perhaps you need to close branches. Maybe you need to add some branches in better locations. Maybe you need to be pouring more dollars into call center and digital, but be thinking return on channel, not just branch profitability. All right, third piece is around performance management. So we've talked about the largest non-interest expense. We need to talk about the largest non-interest expense, and that is people. I'll give you a couple measurements here, but I also want to reinforce the same concept of it's a return on investment. That return on investment in people, just like return on investment in your technology and return on investment in channel. But a few kind of bellwether benchmarks a lot of us have used. Assets per FTE, number we've used for years. The average mid-sized bank pre-COVID was about 6 million in assets per FTE, with the 75th percentile being 7.3 million. And probably many of us remember back when the magic number was 3 to 4 million in assets. Oh, if you're 3 to 4 million, you're incredibly efficient. Well, we've doubled that number, and yet still many of us are not what we would consider efficient. But I'd also encourage you to start monitoring revenue per employee. If we're in a revenue recession, are we monitoring revenue, and are we monitoring revenue relative to employees? So at the midway mark in 2021, banks are averaging about $370,000 in revenue per FTE, which is up over 2020, which was just 337. Now, before we get excited about we're generating a whole lot more revenue, the reality is a lot of that is one times from PPE, from the mortgage boom, which is cooled by now, but also holding our head count relatively flat. So there's always a story to tell around benchmarks, but I'd encourage you to be tracking those metrics and comparing them to peers. But again, the piece I want to make sure you're thinking of as you go into 2022 planning is not just expense reduction, because the old school model of 15% across the board expense cuts doesn't work in today's environment. It's around performance management to make sure we're getting maximum value and performance out of our FTEs. So that's part of a performance management competency. So I want to share just a couple of things on performance management. For those of you that know Cornerstone's blog, Gonzo Banker, we talk about being Gonzo, which is kind of taking a little different look at the data, a little different look at how what's successful in banks today. So the Gonzo approach to performance management is really based on 4 broad themes. The first is determining or confirming your business model and core competencies. What do you want to be great at? Then developing scorecards around your lines of business. Then using that to tie those targets to performance and adding incentive comp or some sort of performance management, performance compensation component that ties back to those benchmarks and those targets, and then using that to prioritize your strategic initiatives for execution. So I'll give you just a couple, we won't go into detail here, just a couple of thoughts here, and again, share some benchmarks. This is some benchmarks around a maturity model, in this case for consumer lending. Everybody knows consumer lending. It's an easy pair, even though I know not all of you are consumer bankers. But the idea, again, is the first step is connecting your business model and your core competencies to then identify performance targets. Said another way, you can't be great at everything. You shouldn't try to be great at everything. You need to be great at the things that are important to you. So if you are a consumer-focused bank, you probably need to be really good at consumer lending. That would mean being up at that first or second tier, being innovative or market leading. And once you say that's where we need to be, then those are the metrics, or give or take, but these are generally accepted target metrics around revenue, turnaround times, production goals, et cetera, around different maturity models. So if you're a consumer bank, you probably need to be making decisions in 2 minutes or less. You need to be hitting large volume, production volume kind of numbers. Now, conversely, if you're a commercial bank, if you're a private wealth bank, if you're not a consumer bank, you should not be investing dollars in trying to be innovative. It may be perfectly okay to be in the managing or even reacting And it's okay, and we think important to even set those targets, because without those targets, you've got people in the branch that are still thinking they need to be turning around the occasional consumer loan in 2 minutes. And they may be arguing for technology investments to help them do that. And while that's well intended, that may not be a strategically wise investment, correct? So again, the point is to match your model with your competencies, with your strategies, then use that to tie to performance metrics. So from this level, then you can go down a level. You'll have this in the slides. I know it's way too much to read here, but just want to give you a feel for what a line of business scorecard might look like. And again, this is for mortgage, a separate example. We would say this is the level of performance benchmarks you should be monitoring for your line of business, for mortgage line. It's staffing, it's production, it's turnaround, it's customer experience, it's risk management. And these type of measurements, maybe not all of these, but these types of benchmarks should then be tied to your line of business manager, and they should have some sort of performance management program that rewards them for achieving or exceed these, or potentially counsels, redirects them, potentially terminates them for not meeting these. So it's scorecard benchmark metrics that are tied to staffing metrics and tied back to comp to reward folks for achieving this, not just at the line of business level, also at the producer, at the closer, at the credit analyst. All of these metrics, there's metrics for each role here, and by tying individual performance back up to line of business, ultimately up to corporate performance, is the key ingredient to performance management. So rather than just saying we need to cut FTE count by 15%, we would argue use scorecards tied to strategy and core competencies to then drive performance management, to reward people for achieving those, and to identify the folks that maybe aren't or can't. Because the new model, this next gen model, is about having fewer employees, but those employees are more highly compensated. They're better equipped with training, better technology, better processes, and performance management is the way to get there. I'm going to skip over these next couple slides because I know there's questions that are coming in and want to make sure we leave time for that. But I'll give you just kind of a quick visual on, again, this is a summary across a number of different clients. As they built out their performance management programs, these are the initiatives that came out of those programs, and we just kind of measure them on a complexity and impact. Thought you might be interested in just seeing what your peers are focused on right now. And then the last one I'll keep, again, just for sort of your notes, is some of the metrics that we are using and helping our clients use today around digital and growing digital. What are those metrics? What are the benchmarks that you can use to tie back to performance management, to tie back to incentive-based comp? Because we have a whole lot of folks asking these kind of questions right now because there's so much investment in digital. Happy to answer any questions on that, but didn't want it to go too deep in that one because I know we want to leave some time for questions here. So the reality is we're all dealing with a whole lot of new challenges, COVID, now Delta, working from home, dealing with remote employees, in addition to the competitive threats from challenger banks, from fintechs, from our boards asking a lot of hard questions about analytics and digital, and should we be standing up digital bank, a whole lot of issues that need to be addressed, but there's still some fundamental disciplines we think are important around non-interest expense management and performance management. Stay focused, make sure we still stay focused on the blocking and tackling, even as we're going through new challenges and exploring strategies in our strategic planning sessions here in the coming days and weeks. So again, to wrap up, our recommended non-interest expense management strategies for 2022, vendor contract negotiations to find saves in your technology investments, particularly on renewals, and then be disciplined in how you use those saves to pour back into appropriate digital and other strategic technology investments. As maybe the next step in your branch rationalization, and branch profitability metrics is to look at return on channel and compare branch to your other channels, because it's likely going to point out there are opportunities that you might be missing in digital and call center, and that you need to be focused more so on sales and revenue production than just on servicing. And then again, instead of just looking for 15% across the board FTE cuts, look at building out a performance management discipline that rewards your employees for achieving very specific targets, whether it's line of business, personal, corporate level targets, to help reward your folks that are helping you achieve that, and maybe identify the folks that need to be trained or counseled or perhaps redirected. So if we can help and answer any detailed questions or how that might apply to you as you head into your planning session, I'd be happy to. And I'll turn it over to you here, both any comments that you might have as well as the questions that have come in from the audience. Appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with everybody.
So Brad, I'm going to hop in and join you, if you're good with that.
Yes, please do.
All right. So, here I thought I could get away without quoting Ferris Bueller, but you're going to put up, the shiny object of a squirrel going by your window. So, this is totally that moment of life moves pretty fast, and if you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could definitely miss it. As you're talking about all these different, activities and discussions and just really, massive opportunities, I've been just jotting some notes down, and, some people have watched Bank Director webinars over the last year and a half, may have heard me talk about working at a technology company before I joined back in September of 2010. So for the last 11 years, I've been kind of talking to banks about issues that you've just described, really important, strategic, risky, expensive. But I also understand on the technology end, there's some massive opportunities. So my first question to you is, it seems to me that bankers go through, I don't know, I'll call it like an expense cutting exercise, every few years. So what's different about what's happening today relative to the past, 10, 11 years?
Yeah, so I think the challenge today is we have to become more efficient. I think efficiency ratio is probably a better indicator than just non-interest expense as a percentage of assets. The efficiency ratio shows you the balance between revenue production from your overhead base. So the difference today is not just looking in a specific expense line item and try to shave a few dollars off of postage, or just look at the payroll costs and go, how do we shave some dollars off of benefits? Because we also have to be making investments in technology and marketing. It's looking at, I think, return on investment, not just in big asset categories, but even in expense categories. So the idea that that the CFO is just going to say all of our overhead needs to be held at 10%, or every department's got to find 15% savings, can work against you if that means we're shaving call center, because our call centers are blowing up right now. I just saw a new number from Cornerstone today that the abandonment rates in call centers in mid-sized banks has doubled in the last year during COVID. We have not addressed what's going on in call center. We're not selling through call center. We're just throwing dollars there at servicing. So we need to be reimagining call center, make those more sales focused, more outbound focused. Digital investments historically have all been servicing focused. We're just now playing catch up. The digital needs to be around sales and not just taking an app, mortgage application, actually completing the sale online. So what's different today is we need to be saving money, but also redirecting those savings back into revenue producing and value producing assets, and in some cases even expenses.
Yeah, well, as you were talking, you clearly touched a nerve with a few folks, because I have a few questions that came into me while you were talking. One of these kind of ties in with what you just said. Let's see if I can paraphrase it. Basically, it's we're not having much luck selling through our digital channels. So how can we consider closing branches given that reality?
Yeah. I'd say a couple things. One is you have to be moving forward on having success in the digital channel. But again, the digital channel is not a standalone channel. A lot of digital sales success is based on digital marketing success and also the connection in with your call center and even your branch. If you think of the difference between Best Buy and Amazon, most of our clients, community banks, mid-sized banks, are not Amazon. They're not just a digital bank, and they don't want to be. They still want to leverage their network. They still want to provide personal service. It's more of a Best Buy type approach. Best Buy is very effective in selling both digitally and combining the power of their branch. You can buy it and pick it up today. You don't have to wait until tonight for Amazon or even tomorrow for next day delivery. So it's how do we integrate our channels? So for those that are maybe anxious about lack of success in digital, it could be because like a lot of folks first cut at digital sales is we just bought a digital account opening system, probably a first generation system that wasn't very good. We let our tech and our risk management people kind of own that. Risk management people want to look at it, touch it, review it 3 times before we actually close the sale. IT maybe took kind of a cheap approach to it, and no wonder it has failed. Digital account opening now, if it's going to be done online, it needs to be opened in 3 minutes. That's what you're competing against. And if you need to be able to speak with somebody, you got to be able to speak with somebody in the call center right away, not, hey, send us an app and we'll call you back in 2 days that you've been pre-approved. You have to look at it in the totality of the sales experience, not just the digital channel. The other part, for a lot of our clients that are commercial banks and go, yeah, we need to do a little of that consumer stuff, but what's commercial, what's the digital strategy for commercial? Remote sales, just arming your commercial lenders and treasury folks with laptops to be able to begin the account application process or to show pricing or to be able to show them what the invoice is going to look like out in their offices or at Rotary or at lunch is very effective digital sales for commercial. The consumer model doesn't have to apply. So again, it depends on what your business model and what your strategy is. But just buying technology and putting it out there has not been effective for most community and regional banks.
Yep. You were talking about some big brands. I'm not going to use the bank that was mentioned, but they do employ a stagecoach as an iconic figure. So the question is about people and really how can you pay employees for performance and not become maybe like a larger institution?
Yeah, without getting sued or hit by the examiners. So we talk about performance management, which encompasses incentive compensation plans, but you have to manage that with what makes sense for your culture. And the Stagecoach guys created a culture that rewarded and didn't even really police production without any concerns on customer experience, risk management, product profitability. That's not a performance management culture. Performance management has to obviously balance those, just like bank execs have to balance growth and revenue with profitability, risk management, and customer experience. So that we don't look at just production goals. The idea of just paying somebody for closing a sale seems very 1990s or very stagecoachy. It's around line of business goals, and even in employees, we think most incentive comp or performance comp plans need to have a balance of employee personal goals as well as line of business and corporate goals. So reward the performance that you want. And I don't think most community and mid-sized banks just want people selling for selling's sake. I don't know that I've ever met a community mid-sized bank that's about that. But there's still a lot of head trash when we talk performance management that they immediately go to that of either old school giving a $50 spiff to a teller for a referral, which has never been very effective, or the other end, which is the Stagecoach guys paying money for accounts that aren't even real and that customers don't need. The performance management discipline is right there in between those.
Yeah. So, I want to respect everyone's time. I'm getting some funny questions. I don't even know how to ask some of them. I'm going to try to take mean, they're all kind of interesting. If we had more time in person, these are like cocktail questions for some. But here's one about smaller institutions when it comes to a core conversion, and really the prospect of taking on such a change is a limiting factor when it comes to the core vendor renewal negotiation. And so, if as I'm reading this, it says is the real threat of a vendor change, how meaningful of what type of leverage does that provide to the client bank?
Yeah, great question. So the core vendors feel like they have all the leverage, and a lot of their leverage is based on timing and the hassle and cost of replacing. So knowing that, you have to balance that leverage out. So the way that you do that is you begin that early when you do have time to replace if you need to do that. So that strategy of beginning your contract renewal negotiations at almost the midpoint allows you to create a very realistic storyline of, hey, if we can't come to good terms, I'm going to replace, and I've got 18 or even 24 months to do that, which the core vendors know that is about the amount of time that you need. If you approach them 6 months before your contract comes up for renewal and try to tell them, hey, if we don't get there, we're going to leave, they know you're full of it because you can't leave in that amount of time. So a big part of leverage is starting earlier at that midpoint when it's a believable storyline. So that's one piece. Other is if you bring outsiders, consultants, attorneys, other types in, it adds credibility to that story and creates leverage. But also, the other side of leverage is having good data, having good pricing data to know what market pricing is. Because even if you don't have great timing leverage, if you do have great pricing data and know, hey, nobody's paying $4.95 a month for check free anymore. Here's what a $5 billion bank should be paying. You can still negotiate with leverage because you've got data. So data, time, and competition are sort of those levers and key to a good negotiation strategy with the core vendors.
Well, so let me wrap it up by asking this question because I think you may have just given the answer, but it's too good not to ask. It's basically, when it comes to technology, it feels like we're playing chicken with our vendors. We're not really sure what the price is. How do I know they're not lying when I'm told this is the best available price?
Not to be too cynical as a 30-year bank technology consultant, but the old joke about lawyers, if their lips are moving, there's a pretty good chance they're lying. But I don't know that I've ever seen a vendor that says this is our best and final pricing actually stick to that. So there's really two simple ways. One is obviously self-serving, and that is to hire consultants and folks that do this and have the data. But short of that, the other is to make it competitive, because all vendors will price differently if they know a reasonably effective vendor is in the mix. If you have Bob's data processing company down the street, they're not going to price accordingly. But if that vendor's top 3 competitor is in that conversation, you will get discounts off of their first pricing where you may not have otherwise, including on renewals, certainly in first-time purchases. So again, timing and competition and data are the keys to leverage. So the data will either come from bringing a competitor in, and at least you have some idea of where the pricing differences are, or you can use folks that spend their time negotiating, consultants, people like us that know that data and can tell you whether that's realistic because we just saw better pricing or just negotiated half that cost for the bank down the street type thing.
Yep. Well, Brad, you've given us a lot in a short period of time. I want to thank you and also your colleagues at Cornerstone for helping us put this webinar together. As a quick reminder, everyone who's watching is going to receive a recorded version of this within the next 24 hours. We're going to put this webinar up on bankdirector.com, so it will be available there. If you're looking for peer data, different perspectives, context, I know Brad and the team at Cornerstone Advisors will be more than happy to help. I know that his contact info will be up But again, I just want to thank everyone for taking the last 55 minutes to join us today. We hope you have a great rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you in a future webinar with Bank Director. Thanks.